It's on now. My message this morning is titled The Roller Coaster Called Grief. And I think, moving through the holidays sometimes can bring up some grief and emotions because, we have these family traditions or we have things that happen that change. For me, we always used to have a big Christmas Eve celebration, and it would be like an open house from like 2 to 8, and family would all come over, and then other friends of ours would stop by and, have some nosh and, celebrate Christmas together. So it was always a big thing. And then as time went on and we started losing some of our family and loved ones, and of course moving and all these things, we don't celebrate that Christmas Eve party anymore. Although this year was really great because we got to have our Christmas Eve fellowship, which I always love. That always reminds me of our family get together, and to me this is family, so it's our family get together. And we had that on the 17th, and we turned around and got to have the Christmas Eve candle lighting service, which was another blessing. So, we had those two celebrations, and that has been kind of the thing that fills in for me. But for those, during that holiday time, I was feeling a little down or feeling some grief because, I was missing some of the people in our lives that we have celebrated with. And, this last year, I lost a brother and a sister. And not that we had been together a lot over the years, but still, those childhood memories and early years of adult life were always shared together. And, I miss them. You feel it in your heart, and you say, wow, it seems like a time that kind of sparks grieving someone that you've lost. But I found this quote, and it really kind of fit of why I could have such strong feelings about this when I hadn't really seen my brother or sister probably the whole time we've been here. I know that, 12 years, that's a long time. But I've seen them on Facebook and that kind of stuff, but that's different. Anyway, but I found this quote: grief is the price you pay for love. And I believe that to be true because if you did not love somebody, you wouldn't grieve over them. You wouldn't feel that connection. And so love is an important point in this equation of grief, because the more we love, the more we grieve, and the more we feel grief within ourselves. And sometimes these emotions flare up because of, several different things: regret, fear, whatever it is that we have experienced through this. Perhaps it was because, we didn't communicate. My brother and sister and I didn't communicate. And I could have reached out to my brother at the end, because he had cancer, and, well, not cancer, but his body was shutting down from alcoholism, but I could have reached out to him because he was still coherent enough to hear a phone call, but, the words weren't there. And my sister, she died quickly, so we think an overdose, but we don't know for sure. But the whole thing is that sometimes you regret that you didn't do something more. Whatever happened in that situation, you might have been right there with them on their deathbed, and you still might regret things that were said or unsaid. And so we have to move through that and say to ourselves, that is not what I want to remember. That is not where I want to be in this situation. But fear can keep us from reaching out, and we have to switch that. We can't feel guilty. We can't feel shameful. We have to just know that this is a process that we go through. However, in reality, what was is, and time does not reverse itself for us to change what has happened. That's the truth. We can't change anything that was.
Right.
It is what it is, and we move forward. So no matter if it had been 20 years since I've seen them, can't change that. Can't make it any different. But I can still send love, the love I've always had for them, and I can send prayers, and that's powerful. And then I found this quote from, it's actually at She Talks, but with Z's. If you went back and fixed all the mistakes you've ever made, you would erase yourself, and that's all I ever needed to hear. Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
So we don't have to sit there and live in regret or shame or guilt or any of those things, because, again, what it was is, and we move forward. We know that if we went back and tried to fix it all, it it wouldn't change anything. And like that's it. You'd erase yourself. So why would you want to? We've lived and learned to move through this. And living from this truth, we realize that we can release any of those feelings that aren't healthy. Any of those things that aren't healthy. Shame, guilt, whatever it is, regret, whatever. You know, when my dad made his transition in 2003, you know, there was some things that happened, and it was really interesting because I hadn't spoken to my dad for about a year, and my sisters kept trying to keep me from going and visiting him and stuff. Like I would call, they always said call first before you come see him or whatever, and so I would call and they'd say, oh, this isn't a good time, whatever. So I mean, I was trying, but you know, he wasn't doing well, and he did have leukemia, so he wasn't healthy. Now I had 9 siblings, and this one particular day, my sisters call me and say, "Will you come stay with Dad? You know, we've got this thing to go to." So, and he's not doing so good. So I said, "Well, that's okay." I wasn't going to go, and then Reverend Warren convinced me to go, which was a good thing, you know, because I needed to go. And God really, I think, was directing me to go. But, you know, in the moment, you're just thinking, why am I going here? Why are they asking me all of a sudden after all this time? I felt like I was getting set up, you know. And then when I went in and saw him, you know, I had already visited people in the hospital. We had already had Warren's mom make her transition at home with us, you know, all these things. So when I saw him, I knew, you know, whoa, you know, it's about time for him to say goodbye. And so it kind of freaked me out. But anyway, they left, and I was sitting there. I was the only one, and I was singing him youth church songs because at the time I was a youth ed director at the church, and so I'm just singing him all these little songs and patting him and telling him it's okay to move on, and you know you're going to be all right. And then in some of his last breaths, all of a sudden he stops, and he says to me, "Fran, there is no money for you." And I laughed when he said it, you know, because I thought, how crazy is this? I said, "Dad, I'm not here for that." And I said, "I'm just here to love you and help you move through this time." But, you know, I think he regretted and felt shameful that he had taken me out of his will and was kind of more or less letting me know that that had happened. And for him, I think, you know, looking back on it, I think he was releasing his shame and guilt and his regret. And when you look at it that way, then it didn't seem quite so crazy. But, you know, people say and do crazy things, whether they're dying or not dying. Oh, yeah. And sometimes we take it in that moment as something against us rather than taking it as something that they're processing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So you have to look at grief as some of that kind of processing that is happening. And once we can let go of it and release it, then we can not hold on to that burden and we can move forward. And that's what happened with my dad. I really think in that moment when he said that to me, which I thought was crazy, and what a thing to say, you know what I'm saying? But then he took his last breath. Well, he actually did it twice. I thought he was gone, and I go out because where he was at in his house, I couldn't get reception. I went out the back and called Warren, and I said, "I think my dad just made his transition." And he goes, "Well, go back in there." And I said, "It's freaking me out." You know, and it did. It freaked me totally out. So I go back in there, and I'm like patting his hand, thinking, okay, is this really it? You know? And then he does another one of those gasps. You know how people do? And it's like, oh my gosh. And then like, you know, it seemed like 3 hours later, but it was 2 minutes later than it was, you know, than it was gone. So I just sat there for a while because I couldn't move forward, but then I called my sisters and told them. And they said, "Oh, we're glad you were there when this happened." I was like, okay, so I think for them too, it was a thing of release and of regret and shame because they were part of this whole thing of writing me out of the will, which, you know, I don't have any animosity to that. That's what it was. And now is where it is. And, you know, what you don't know doesn't hurt you. But anyway, I found this quote by Joby Saliceti. And it says, "No matter what feelings of fear or inadequacy you're struggling with, trust that God brought you here and God is with you. I had to do that in that moment. I had to trust that God was with me, that I was here for this reason, and it was okay. And, you know, I did feel inadequate. I did freak out. It was like I wasn't even really sure what I should do in that moment, you know. And even when they got back and were going to take care of him, I mean, it was like, do I leave? Do I not leave? It was just that ebb and flow. But you know what? In the minute I walked out the door, I felt released too. I felt that, you know, no matter what has happened, I didn't have to carry any of that burden with me. And I do believe that, you know, he felt free and was able to just move on in that moment, which was, you know, I guess, and my family all felt like they were ready to let him go at that point too, which I don't think they were before then. And maybe it was because I was the only one that hadn't seen him, you know, towards the end too, and they wanted me to see him. I don't know. But all these things that you have to process through sometimes, you know, is a blessing, not something that you have to struggle with your whole life. And of course, there's stages of grief that come and go. And this happens all the time. Grief is very sneaky. A sound, a scent, a song, even a smile can become tears. Isn't that true?
That's very true.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do we hear something or whatever? And like I said, for me, Christmas can bring that for me, because one of my very favorite brother and sibling made his transition in December 2002, and his birthday was also in December. His birthday was the 23rd, so always around Christmas time, I think about him a lot, and we acted like twins when we were little, so, you know, it was like we were that close. And when I hear that song, I Miss You Most at Christmas time, I always get tears, because I think about, you know, him not being here and how we made this deal that we were always going to be here for each other. Well, so I know that all of us have had similar experiences, and that, you know, a certain fragrance can remind us of a certain time or a certain person. A certain food can remind us of a certain person too. I know for Sandy and Mickey, every time they make pineapple upside down cake, it reminds them of Georgia, their mom, you know, and that's huge. It's a thing that happens. And these little triggers that flare up our emotions is a good thing, because we're processing still. We're supposed to move through this. We're supposed to come to a place where we have a better understanding and can feel more love. You know, that's what I feel like it is about. I mean, even with my brother, when I think about him like that, I still feel so much love for him, and I feel like writing this talk. I mean, I was just like sending love like crazy into that oneness with God. And I feel like that's a thing that we can do with each other. I was sending it to my brother and sister and that just made their transitions this year, and my parents, you know. I feel like we get to choose whether we're going to suffer through this experience of life and the circle of life, or we get to choose to embrace it and be excited about it and celebrate it. This quote says, "It is not life that causes suffering, but our expectation that life should be the way we want." And that's true. We get upset when someone makes a transition because we want it to be something different. We try to make it something different. We are putting ourselves before that person who has just passed on. And we have to realize that our part to play in this is the experience of what we want to remember and how we want to live through it, and how we can be excited that we had this experience with this person. And it's so true, and no matter what it is. And, you know, and there's many other times that grief shows up, not just when somebody makes their transition, but there's other places where grief shows up, and we have to process through it. So understanding better when a person, a loved one makes their transition, and understanding that helps us in these other life situations, believe it or not. That's what's important about looking at it spiritually. But divorce, wait, am I ahead of myself? No. Yeah. Grief is a natural thing, and I don't want us to think that we cannot grieve, because we can and we should. Absolutely, we should, because like I said, it's a process. This is how we move through. Some of the places is divorce is a big one where grief can show up. And I was divorced once. Yeah, and it can. Breaking up a relationship, whether it is friendship or partnership, is tough. You know, if you've ever had a friend that did you dirty dog wrong, but you know, you did a lot of fun things together, or you had lots of love experience, I mean, it can be hard. You can be grieving that person sometimes, especially if you're doing something that you used to do with that person, or go to eat at a certain restaurant with that person. A change of job or employment. That's another one that you can grieve. Believe it or not, you can miss the people at work. You can just miss that whole experience that you're having. And of course, moving is huge. You can really grieve if you move, because it could just be from the idea of having that same routine of walking into an apartment building, going to that same apartment, or whatever. You know, that's a routine that you have. And if you switch it, sometimes you have to adjust. And the feelings that you're having are grief. It could be, you know, a whole new neighborhood change or whatever. It can go on and on. But allowing ourselves to feel this is important. To feel grief is important. We don't have to negate it. We can feel it and let it move through us. Because one thing about working through the process of grief is that it keeps you from lashing out at others. Well, there's still a stage in there, you'll find out in a minute, that can lead you to that too. But let's briefly look at those 7 stages of grief. This is why we should grieve. I'm sorry, jumping ahead of myself. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted, from Matthew 5:4. So we know that we will be comforted. We know that God is always with us. Like Reverend Warren said in his meditation, that we are here, and no matter what's happening, no matter what we're feeling, God is with us. God's got this, you know. Okay, shock is the first one. We just can't believe it. That's what happens. How could this be? Why did this happen? We all feel that?
Yes. Yeah.
And let's just look at it from the state of someone making their transition or moving on. Denial. There's no way this is true. Where is the proof? Avoidance. I mean, like I said, when my dad made his transition and I went outside the first time to call Warren and say he was gone, then I started thinking, wait a minute, is he really gone? And Warren said I had to go back inside. And I went back inside, and then he wasn't gone. I was like, oh, maybe I'm just dreaming this. But then, you know, he did move on. But, you know, we get in that, it's like an instant reaction that we have to prove what this has happened. You know, how could this be? Anger, yeah. We go through a stage where we're angry. You know, some people get mad at God at this point, frustrated and intense emotions, lashing out at others. Some people will move through somebody making their transition just even keel, and then all of a sudden they just lash out, and I know I've been there before. And usually it's just that holding that grief in instead of allowing it to process that causes that. The next one is bargaining. We're looking for a way out or begging God for a different outcome. Done that before. Begged for somebody not to be gone. My brother. When that happened, I mean, I was sitting there going, no, he's not gone. You know, you do that. Depression. Even though we can feel down and lethargic, this is actually a time when we realize the inevitable. Because our thoughts and our feelings become so heavy because we haven't really processed and let go that we feel like we're down in a well, like we're down and lethargic. And this might feel like a well we can't crawl out of, but it is truly a turning point. And so when we see somebody kind of depressed from somebody making their transition or whatever, we can also know that this is just part of the process, that they can work through this. Testing. We begin to seek for realistic solutions for us and our thoughts. And mainly we do it through our thoughts. Like, okay, if this person's gone, what does that mean for me? What's going to happen next? And I've seen this time and time again when somebody has got a spouse that has made their transition. You know, they not sure what should happen next, you know. And so part of that is like that. The next one's acceptance. We finally accept. This is when we know that we must move forward and all is going to be okay. And that acceptance, when that happens, it'll feel so good, but at the same time, we might jump back into one of those other stages too. And you have to realize that that's just part of the process. But I like to look at these 7 stages and interpret them spiritually. And here's my take on that. Shock can be an absence of faith. Because sometimes people get, I always say the person at the funeral who's sobbing the hardest is searching for God. They don't have that in them, that they haven't realized that full faith that God is with them in that moment. And sorrow can sound like that, but also that sorrow can be relieved once you know that you are one with God and your loved one is one with God. So faith is important. Faith in ourselves, in others, and in God. When we question what is happening, we block the reality of the present moment. And the present moment is our injured love. That's all it is. So our love is hurting. We are hurting because we've lost this loved one. Denial. Denial in this is the opposite of spiritual denial. However, it can remind us to activate spiritual denial by recognizing that whatever is happening right now has no power over us. So we know that Fillmore defined denial as not allowing someone to have power over us, not having a situation to have power over us. That we can say, I am in this experience, but I am not going to let it control me, right? And so that helps us a lot. And then we can affirm we are one with God, and as such, God is comforting us right here, right now. This is huge. It's huge. It can shift you instantly once you realize that. Anger is the next stage, and anger is simply the grief within you. And the minute you say that or think that, this grief is just, that anger is just the grief. It just needs to be expressed. It needs to be let out. There's the simple practice of release can help us rid our minds of this negativity. And the burning bowl that we did, was that last week? Yeah. Is a perfect example of release. You can release some feelings because you're doing something physical the week before last, yeah. You can release those feelings. And so the other thing is about that, it was last week.
It was last week.
Yeah, it was last week.
Was I here?
No.
Oh, wait, I did the candle, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, that's a simple one. Another one is just to write it on a piece of paper and crumble it up and throw it in the garbage. That's another way to easily release. Some people go for walks, some people ride their horses, some people, whatever helps you release anything that's within you that can help you rid yourself of any negativity. Bargaining, a spiritual way to change this is listen. All of us have prayed those beseeching prayers, haven't we? Begging God to make it our way. I know I have. Please, dear God, don't make this so. And we beg God for that. But the best spiritual practice to implement when we are feeling this way is to affirm over and over again, God, you got this. We give it to God. Use the golden key. Also, let yourself let go of it and give it to God. Just know God's in the midst of this, making it okay, and you're going to be okay. Not only are we continuing to release, but we are letting the highest good to manifest in us. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Don't we want the highest good to come forth no matter what is happening?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Depression. To combat this disorder, it is important to deny the power of negative thoughts and flood our minds with affirmations. Please, I don't care. I know, and let me read the last part first and then I'll go back. I know medication might be needed, which is fine because medications come from God's divine ideas to help people. So we know that's okay. And if you're experiencing depression, please remember that you still have the power of your mind. You might have a disorder. You might have something that is triggering something within you, but you still have the power of your mind. And by denying any power you're giving to anything negative and affirming the truth of yourself, I am strength, I am power, I am aligned with God. Any of these affirmations can help you not let that take you down to a place where you don't want to go. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Testing. This is when we start having a breakthrough and can begin to give thanks for this person or situation in our lives. And we can thank God and focus on the good. This is when we're ready to accept the highest good. We can say, oh, this or something better or the highest good for all. but we have to be willing to accept that. And sometimes in those moments, we don't feel like we want to accept it. But once we start accepting it and realizing that we are grateful for this person and that God is bringing forth the highest good, then we have a whole new place to be experiencing life and to be experiencing our loved one. Acceptance. In this moment, a weight is lifted. And you feel it. You've felt it before. All of us have been through this before, where we felt like a weight is lifted and the joy returns and a sense of peace wells up in our souls and we feel the newfound freedom. Haven't we all felt that before? And we could feel it for a day, we could feel it for a month, and there's going to be that scent or that song, and it might bring a little more grief coming out. But that's okay because we know it's that grief is just the process that we've worked through before, and we can feel that this point again easily and effortlessly. We can. And when grief shows up, if we are prayed up, we can easily slow down the ride, a roller coaster ride, spiritually process the experience, and actually flow through it all. Thank you for being here today. God bless you. Now, we all might be ball babying.